Hey, Lakeshore Church Online. We're so glad that you joined us today. My name is Dave, and I'll be your host. We're so excited that we can still spend this time together in spirit and online in community. And right now, people here in Rochester, New York, and all around the world are tuning in to worship together. This might be a little different than what you're used to, but wherever you are, we hope you can sing with us and hear a message we believe God has for each of us.
Well, hey everyone, so great to be here with you, and we're just going to spend a few moments to worship together. Before we do that, I want to share this psalm from Psalm chapter 40, verse 17. It says, "As for me, I am poor and needy, but the Lord takes thought of me. You are my help and my deliverer. Do not delay, oh my God." And every single day, every hour of our lives, we need Him, and especially now in these times, in these situations. So I want to just ask that we all come together, come before Him in worship and give Him all the glory, even in light of our circumstances now.
Lord, I come, I confess, bowing here, I find my rest. Without you, I fall apart. You're the one that guides my heart. Lord, I need you. Oh, I need you. Every hour I need you. My one defense, my righteousness. Oh God, how I need you. The sin runs deep, your grace is more. When grace is found, is where you are, where you are. Lord, I am free. Holiness is Christ in me. Yeah, Lord, I need you. Oh, I need you. Every hour I need you. My one defense, my righteousness. Oh God, how I need you. So teach my song to rise to you. When temptation comes my way, and when I cannot stand, I'll fall on you. 'Cause Jesus, you're my hope and stay. Lord, I need you. Oh, I need you. Every hour I need you. My one defense, my righteousness. Oh God, how I need you. You're my one defense, my righteousness. Oh God, how I need you. I need thee, oh, I need thee. Every hour I need thee. Oh, bless me now, my Savior. I come to thee.
What an incredible moment we've just experienced together. Now think about it. You are worshiping with people all around the world at the same time. How amazing is that? And that's only possible because of your generosity and your support to us over the years. If you feel led to give and worship through your tithes and offerings, you can go to the Lakeshore app and click Give, or go to our website, lakeshorechurch.org/give, and click Donate Now. We're so grateful for your partnership to bring the good news of Jesus Christ all around the world. If you're new to Lakeshore Church online, if you have any prayer requests, or there's any way that we can help you, we want to connect with you. In the Lakeshore app that I mentioned before, click the Connect button at the bottom of the screen and let us know you're here. I hope you're ready to hear a message appropriately timed for what is happening these days.
Hi, everyone. You know, when life gets really challenging, we ask some of our deepest questions about God. And one of the questions we ask when life gets really challenging is this: where is God? Where's God when this situation happens? Where's God when that happens? This is one of the oldest questions in human history. Humans have been asking it for thousands and thousands of years. And really what drives the asking of the question at its foundational root is this truth. We know that God is a good God, and we have trouble reconciling why a good God would let challenging, distressful, perplexing situations happen in our life, which we seem to not be able to make any sense out of. But the truth is this: God is the same no matter what happens in our lives. He's always there for us, even in our confusion, even in our frustration, even in our mixed up mind. He's always there. And he wants to make sure that we know that he's always there, even when life gets crazy. So today, we're beginning a new series that I think is really relevant for the days ahead, for where we are today, and that's this. We're beginning a series called Where is God? We are going to look at some of the most common questions that follow where is God. So we're going to look at a number of weeks where we say, where is God when this, when that, when the other? And what we're going to do for almost all of the messages is we're going to look at a character rather than just get a text, although we'll do that, I think, once. Then get a text that gives us the principles. We're not only going to get a text, we're going to get a life behind a text so that we can see some of the most godly people, some of the most famous characters in the Bible, maybe some others not so famous, that they went through some of the same trials, some of the same questions, some of the same struggles, and when they asked, where is God, they had a confidence in the answer. And we're going to provide life-changing principles to help you in all of these various situations week by week. So I hope you'll be here every single week to tune in for this critical series. I think a very practical series, a very helpful series, a very meaningful series. Where is God? Now today, I want to begin by answering a big question we ask. Where is God when life seems unfair? When life seems unfair. Why do bad things happen to us? Why do we suffer losses, experience all kinds of pain, go through long periods of setbacks and problems? Times when we feel helpless, times when we feel useless, times when the circumstances around us seem so completely senseless. Life just seems so unfair. We say to ourselves things like this: why do I have to go through this? Why do I have to receive so much bad news? Why do I experience so much and make so little progress in the midst of it? Let's get this thing over with. Let's go. And we ask lots of questions like this. If there's a person who's gone through a series of seemingly unfair experiences, the person we're going to look at today was one. His name is Joseph, and he's a character in the Old Testament. He shows us so much about how to respond to it all. So what I want you to do is take out your notes. You can click somewhere on your, depending on which medium you're watching, click the notes, and I encourage you to bust them out. And we're going to look at his story in Genesis chapter 37 to 50. I want you now to look at Genesis chapter 37, verses 3 to 4. Here's how the whole story gets started. Genesis 37, 3 to 4. Israel loved Joseph more than any of his other sons. Let's stop right there. Israel is the new name given to Jacob. The patriarch of all Jewish people, by the way, and all Arab people, is Abraham. Abraham had a son named Isaac. Isaac had a son named Jacob. After Jacob had a wrestling match with God, he was given his new covenant name, Israel, which was not only his name, but it was the adopted name for his children and ultimately for the nation of Israel. It literally came from Jacob. That's who's being referred to here. Israel, or Jacob, Joseph's father, loved Joseph more than any of his other sons because he had been born to him in his old age. And while it's not stated here, another reason is because he was born to him of his wife. You know, of all the kids Jacob had, only 2 of them he had with his wife Rachel, and Joseph was one of them. The rest were through other women, 3 other women, 4 women that he had children with in total. And he made a richly ornamented robe for him. And so you can think of Joseph in the Technicolor Dreamcoat, if you will, and Jacob made a coat just for Joseph. Now, what do you think that did to his brothers? Well, the text tells us the obvious. When his brothers saw that their father loved him more than any of them, they hated him. Not Jacob, although they were probably resentful to a certain degree, but Joseph, and could not speak a kind word to him. Now, this event starts a series of dominoes that fall in Joseph's life that cause him so much pain and so much heartache. But we see God's hand in it all. We see where's God when? We're going to see him all over Joseph's story. So today, I want to look at how to respond when life seems so unfair. Now, Joseph, a little bit of background, was Jacob's second youngest of the 12 kids that he had, who made up the 12 tribes of Israel, as I mentioned earlier. And we see the sibling rivalry perk up right here. Joseph didn't ask for special treatment from Jacob, but his father's wife, his original wife, Rachel, because he was firstborn from his original wife, had a special love for Joseph. The multicolored robe or tunic gift from Jacob set him apart from his brothers. And he was even exempted, when you read the rest of the story, he was even exempted from some of the menial tasks. He was kind of given a light workload, which of course didn't fly very well with the brothers. And he had 2 dreams that he shares in Genesis chapter 37, verse 7 and 9, that he shares with his brothers. The first was a dream that he was an upright bundle of grain, and that 11 other bundles of grain bowed to him. Now, who do you think the upright bundle of grain was? Well, he says it was him. Who do you think the 11 other bundles of grain are? Well, it's pretty easy to decipher that it was the brothers. And he said the brothers would one day bow down to him. That, along with the father's behavior, along with the tunic and the multicolored robe, this was not building credibility with his brothers. Then he had a second dream, and he said the sun, the moon, and the 11 stars would bow before him. Now, of course, like the 11 grains of wheat, the stalks of wheat that bowed down, the 11 stars were the brothers. But who's the sun and the moon? That's his parents. Even Jacob would bow down before him. Now, that was unheard of, to have your father bow down before the son, maybe the other way around. And this sealed the deal with his brothers, and we see how they respond to this. And we see 2 steps to his story to help us see how to deal with life when life is unfair. What do you do when life is unfair? Well, the story really gives us 2 steps, 2 predominant things you do. When life gets unfair, what do? You do these 2 things. They're overarching principles, and I'll give you specifics for each one. And I encourage you, when you are tempted to say, God, where are you? This is so unfair. I want you to throw in this word, seemingly. Don't tell God life is unfair. better, tell God, God, this seems so unfair, because it really is God at work. So what is the first thing you do? Step number one, you must get God's perspective on it. This is what you see. The first thing you have to do when life seems unfair, you have to stop getting your perspective and start getting God's perspective on it. That's what we see Joseph do in this story. He gets God's perspective on it. So often in our predicaments, we focus on ourselves and our questions. We focus on our predicaments, how we can weasel out of it, get out of it, escape out of it, end it quickly. But the place to first focus your attention is on God and what he's doing. We see this in three ways in this account of Joseph's life. Here's the first in your notes. God sees everything we're going through and cares. He sees everything we're going through and cares. Joseph's life, as we'll see, goes to the pits, literally. Look at this phrase in your notes. But the Lord was with Joseph. Now, why do I say this phrase? Because this phrase occurs in Genesis 39:2, when Joseph was taken to Egypt. In Genesis 39:21 and 23, when Joseph was thrown in prison. In Genesis 48:21 and 49:24 to 25, when Joseph's father, Jacob, died. 5 critical junctures in Joseph's life, the Bible says, but the Lord was with Joseph. Where is God when life seems unfair? The first perspective you have to get is that God sees everything that we're going through. He sees it all. And he hasn't stopped caring. He still cares. When circumstances aren't with us, that doesn't mean God isn't. Even when we don't know where life is going, we can know that God is going there with us on that journey. We forget that. And I think that's why God says it 5 times in a course of 11 chapters in the life of Joseph. Do you feel forgotten by God? You might feel that he's forgotten, but he cares for you deeply. And sometimes you have to fight through the feelings. Now, watch this. The second thing that I see we need to get the right perspective on is this. God allows individual freedom, but he oversees. He allows other people, he allows even us, to have a certain amount of freedom. We don't have total freedom, we have limited freedom. But God allows individual freedom, and yet he still oversees. It's a divine mystery. God gives human freedom, but limited human freedom, because he still oversees everything to make sure that it turns out as he wants. This is a complex divine mystery, but nonetheless, it's true. Over the years, I've seen people do some incredibly cruel and dark-hearted things, so senseless in what they did. And the only way I can cope is to know that God oversees it all. That's how Joseph handled 3 major trials in his life. Look at the first, when he was forsaken at home. He was about 17 years old, Genesis 37:4 and 22. It says, his brothers hated him so much they wouldn't speak to him in a friendly manner, as we just read earlier. And then they said this, let's not kill him. Let's throw him into this well so he'll die without our touching him. In other words, they wanted Joseph out of their life, but they didn't want to kill him. So they basically threw him in a pit without being the actual murderers directly, if he was to die. To be forsaken at home is so absolutely hurtful, and Joseph experienced it from his own brothers through no fault of his own. Where else could we be hurt more than home? Joseph was hurt more than home, but he remembered that God oversees. Home is supposed to be where you're loved, and he wasn't, but he remembered that God oversees. You ever feel forsaken at home? Maybe somebody in your family isn't treating you right and putting you through the ringer unfairly, seemingly. God's still overseeing. Here's a second. He was falsely accused at work, not only at home, but he's falsely accused at work. Joseph was discovered in this pit, and he was sold to Egypt, but he rose in royal ranks. And as he rose in ranks, Genesis 39:7, 10, and 17 talks about how as he was rising in ranks, a man named Potiphar had a wife who had the hots for Joseph. She really liked Joseph. So watch this. After a while, his master's wife, that is Joseph's master, who was Potiphar's wife, began to desire Joseph and asked him to go to bed with her. He refused. He didn't say, oh, God's given me this opportunity. No, that wasn't from God. That was from the evil one. He refused. But she asked day after day, Joseph, sleep with me, sleep with me. And then, when he wouldn't, she falsely claimed, that Hebrew slave tried to rape me. When he was forsaken at home, he did nothing wrong. But now he does what's right by not giving into the seduction of Potiphar's wife. And what does he get? Jail. Imagine the confusion Joseph must have had. Every time I do something right, I get a dream from you, God, I share it. I operate faithfully with Potiphar as my master in Egypt, and I get falsely accused. You ever feel God missed something? Like you feel like you're in the right, somebody's in the wrong, but you are suffering for it, and it's just seemingly unfair? We've all been there. He still saw God overseeing it. And then the third thing, not only is he forsaken at home, falsely accused at work, he's forgotten in prison. Joseph interpreted the dream of Pharaoh's chief cupbearer. And look at what happens in Genesis 40, verse 14 and 23. Joseph says, please be kind enough to mention me to the king and help me get out of this prison. In other words, I interpreted this dream. Tell the king that I interpreted this dream. Maybe I'll get some favor. But the wine steward never gave Joseph another thought. He forgot all about him. Now, in this third phase, he helps someone out, and they forget all about it. And by the way, all of this happened before Joseph even hit 30 years old. You ever feel forgotten by others? Yeah, I'll turn in your resume. Yeah, I'll help you out. Yeah, I'll call you this week. Yeah, I'll do something, and they don't. And then sometimes you feel like, where's God? God allows all of this to happen. How would you respond? How do you respond? When you're forsaken, when you're falsely accused, when you're forgotten in life's prison, if you will. Some of us sulk, or some of us fight, or some of us just turn our back on God. I've seen this. Some of us escape into some fantasy life. But God watches and he oversees it even when humans do things that don't seemingly seem fair. I heard the story of W.A. Criswell, who used to be the former pastor of First Baptist Church in Dallas, Texas, where my wife and I went to graduate school, and he was the pastor there at the time. And he told the story of a Russian cosmonaut who circled the earth, and he said this, we have circled the earth and explored the outer space around it, and we are here to report that we have not seen God. And when W.A. Criswell told that story, he said, well, all they had to do was open up that space capsule. They'd see God. And that's what it's like. Sometimes you think you don't see God, but here's the truth. God saw all that Joseph went through, and Joseph still saw God's hand in it. God may seem indifferent until we gain this third perspective, and that's this. God has full control, and he determines outcomes. God has full control, and he determines outcomes. Why was Joseph in the pit? Due to his brother's behavior. God kept the brothers from killing him. That's the right way to see it. Why was Joseph in prison? God gave him favor in the Egyptian government to work his way up. That's the right way to see it. Why was Joseph seemingly forgotten? God had the perfect plan to get him to the right place at the right time in working up to Egypt. That's the right way to see it. We have to remember that God has full control and he determines outcomes. Look at Genesis 39:23. The Lord was with Joseph, what we said earlier, and gave him success in whatever he did. You're like, huh? Gave him success in whatever he did. Yes, absolutely. Because with God, and I want you to write this down, or at least remember it. With God, a setback is a set up for a comeback. A setback is a setup for a comeback. And all God was doing was setting him back to get him prepared for the comeback he wanted. Listen, if you want to hammer a nail into a piece of wood, you don't get the hammer and just always go forward, right? You bring it back to build momentum to go forward. You know, back at my house, we don't have a creek, but it's more like a swale. And when that's got water in it and I want to get to the other side, to the woods on the other side of it, I don't just stand there and do the standing jump. I get a running start so I can do it. I'm middle-aged. I don't jump that good anyway, even when I was healthy or young. But you have to get a running start. It's the same thing. Even though at times God makes us step back 2 steps, he does it so that we can step forward 5 steps. Now, God can do whatever he wants, but he decides to use this 2 steps forward, backward, 5 steps forward approach so often to teach us lessons that we need to learn, like seeing him in everything, even when our eyes say, this is not fair. Learn this. People may try to ruin your float, but they can never rain on God's parade. They might try to ruin your float, but they're not going to rain on your parade. Life may deal you a bad set of cards, but God will help you win with that hand. Nothing is ever accidental with God. If you write something down, write that down. Nothing is ever accidental with God. The God of heaven is not haphazard. He's fully in control of everything. So the first thing you have to do is what Joseph did. You have to get perspective on it. We gave you all these situations in which Joseph had the right perspective. And we gave you 3 principles on how to get the right perspective. But then you've got to do the next step, and that's this. It's how you respond. Step 1, get God's perspective on it. This is what to see. Step 2, change your reaction to it. And this is what to do. First, it's what you see, then it's what you do. First, it's getting the perspective, then it's getting the reaction. Once you get the right perspective, what to see, now you're positioned with the right perspective to take the right steps and reactions. This is precisely why Joseph succeeded and how we can succeed when life seems so unfair to us. How did he respond? 3 key ways. Same 3 key ways you and I need to respond when life seems unfair and we're asking, where is God? Where is God? Where is God? First thing, step 1, or point 1 under step 2, work. Work. What do I mean by that? Do the right things right where you are. Do the right things right where you are. Joseph didn't just sit by idly and say, why me? Throw a little pity party. Joseph did what he could right where he was. He didn't wait till all was good. He worked to get it to be to a place where God saw it, was pleased, and made it good. Now, after Joseph was faithful and in prison, 2 years later, Pharaoh had a dream again. The cupbearer remembers Joseph interpreted a dream 2 years previous, and he says, I know somebody who can interpret your dream. He presents Joseph. Joseph interprets the dream, and the dream, which sets the tone for the rest of the story, is this. He said, Pharaoh, here's your dream. And without getting in all details, you can read about it. He says this, your dream means this. For the next 7 years, there will be good weather and good rain, and you will have bumper crops. He says, the next 7 years, after these 7 years, will be years of famine. Everybody will need crops. So the dream means this. During these 7 years of abundance, grow all you can, save all you can, store all you can, so that you can weather the 7 years of famine. Notice Genesis 41, 38 to 40. Pharaoh says this, who could do a better job than Joseph? For he is a man who was obviously filled with the Spirit of God. And I'll stop right there. Pharaoh didn't become a follower of the God of Israel, Yahweh, the Lord. In Egypt, they were mostly polytheistic. They had their own gods, but whenever somebody had a special work, they would just say, all right, that God's pretty good. And they would incorporate that God into their pantheon of gods. They were polytheistic, many gods. So it's not saying that Pharaoh became a follower of Israel's God, not at all. He just added him to the list because he saw Joseph deliver so miraculously on the interpretation of his dream. Turning to Joseph, Pharaoh said to him, "Since God has revealed the meaning of the dreams to you, you are the wisest man in the country. I am hereby appointing you to be in charge. What you say goes throughout Egypt. I alone will outrank you." Isn't that amazing? Joseph went from the pit to the pinnacle. And Pharaoh said, "Nobody but me will outrank you. You call the shots, Joseph." What an amazing work of God. Now, when did God work on Joseph's behalf? When Joseph cried? No, he probably did. When Joseph gave up? No, he probably felt like it. When Joseph complained? No. It's when Joseph kept doing the right things right where he was. He did the right things in the pit. He did the right things in the prison. He did the right things when Potiphar's wife came after him, and he did the right things when he reached the pinnacle, second in command in Egypt. He was faithful wherever he could be. He didn't say, "I'll be faithful when you do something, God. I'll be faithful later." No, he was faithful right where he was. And the advice for us is to be faithful right where we are, even when life seems unfair. By the way, Joseph had two children, and the two children and their names given in Genesis 41:50 to 52 were Manasseh and Ephraim. The names are significant. Manasseh means this: God made me forget my troubles. Isn't that something? He had a son. God made me forget all my troubles. God will do the same for you. And his second son was Ephraim. And that means God made me fruitful in suffering. And God wants to make you fruitful if you will endure suffering and discipline, even when it seems so unfair. When life seems so unfair, do not give up on God. Get up for God. Be faithful right where you are. Then God will take you exactly to where you need to be. I think of a story of, and here this week we celebrate our 25th anniversary, and I look forward to celebrating it with you, either in June, or if we're still locked in our house, or it's just too quick to do it and we don't have enough time to plan, then we'll do it in September. We are going to celebrate the gracious goodness of God in giving us 25 years of ministry here in Rochester at Lakeshore Community Church. But anyway, I remember when I felt the call of God to ministry. It actually started in 1987-ish, 87, 88-ish. And I remember going to my pastor in Florida and saying, "Pastor Joe, I feel God's call of ministry, and I want to have you help me and mentor me." And he goes, "Okay, that's great." He goes, "I want you to meet me here real early Sunday morning." So it was a few hours before service, and I'm going, hot diggity, that was pretty easy. I meet with Pastor Joe, and Pastor Joe is going to work with me on when I'm going to preach and when I'm going to do all this pastoral stuff. And I get there, and Joe goes, "Hey, Vince, good to see you. All right, let's set up the church." And so I went in the rented facility that the church was meeting in, and we went from the back room and we carried all the stuff and set up the church. And the whole time I'm like, I don't think Pastor Joe heard me. I think he must have thought I said, "Pastor Joe, I want to help you set up the church." He must not have heard me. And I never asked him why he did that, but it was all said and done. And I did that for a few weeks, and it eventually became clear to me what Pastor Joe Hunt was telling me. By the way, I saw him last July, the last time I got to see my mom alive, and I went to church. He's not in ministry right now. Went to church, and we got together, had lunch, and some other friends from the church as well. It was really, really cool. I knew what he was doing. It took a while. What he was saying is, you have to start where you're at. You've got to do the setup stuff. And then eventually in time, I spoke at the church. I did communion. I did some other pastoral things, and it was really, really cool. But you know what? He was teaching me this principle. You got to start right where you're at. By the way, it's interesting. I didn't know we'd start Lakeshore Community Church at the time. Didn't know I would even be in full-time ministry, though I'd hoped it. And guess what? I had to do a lot. Set up the church. And it was sort of like a dress rehearsal practice. Here's the point. Be faithful where you are. Work now. The second reaction to life when it seems unfair, first, work. The second is this, wait. You're going, work, wait? You can do both. You can walk and chew gum, especially if you're a woman. If you're a man, you can't. We walk and we go, hold on a second. No, we can walk and chew gum, just teasing. Women can multitask, by the way. Men, I don't know. We just can only do one thing, it seems, or we're not as good at it. Anyway, what do I mean by work and wait? Work, do what you can right where you are. Wait, I mean this. Depend on God to do a great work in time. When I say wait, I don't mean do nothing. I mean wait in faith, depending on God to do a great work, and here's the key, in time. In time. One of the great things you see in Joseph's life throughout the story is his ability to wait on God. By the way, waiting on God is not doing nothing. It's actually a form of faith. The Psalms say we must wait on the Lord. Joseph waited on God, and after his brothers came to him from Canaan to buy grain during that second 7 year, remember the dream he said? 7 years, be time of plenty. Harvest all of it, save all you can, keep growing as much as you can, and save it up, because you're going to have enough for 7 years, not only for the people, but also for people from other parts of the area and the region. And so in that second year of famine, his brothers come from Canaan at the instruction of Jacob and to buy grain. They didn't recognize Joseph was Joseph, but Joseph knew they were his brothers. And Joseph didn't tell them. He waited on God to do a great work first. Look at Genesis 45, 3-5, and verse 8a. That is the first half of verse 8. Joseph said to his brothers, I am Joseph. This is after they had come a second time. They came to buy some grain. Joseph said, do you have any other brothers? And he goes, I have one more. Of course, Joseph knew this. The other brother was, I believe it was Benjamin, and it was the other brother, Joseph's full brother, who was also born of Rachel, Jacob's wife, his younger brother. And he said, if you come back and you don't bring him, you'll never see me. So they talked Jacob into letting his younger son go. He goes, no, he's going to die like Joseph did, even though Joseph didn't really die. They come back a second time. Joseph still didn't reveal his identity. He planted a silver cup and some silver in their bags. One of their men chased them down and said, why did you steal from him, master? They said, we didn't steal from him. And they said, yeah, you did. And they find it. And then Joseph waited 2 visits and then a return on the way back from their second visit to him. And he says this, I am Joseph, a very classic, powerful line. Is my father still living? But his brothers were not able to answer him because they were terrified at his presence. Yeah, they were like, man, we just put this our brother in a pit. He's going to kill us. Then he said to them, come close to me. I am your brother Joseph, the one you sold into Egypt. And now do not be distressed and angry with yourselves for selling me here, because, this is classic, because it was to save lives that God sent me ahead of you. It was not you who sent me here, but God. Well, yeah, it was. In one sense, it was them putting him in a pit, but God was in control. He depended on God to do a great work in time. Because he had the right perspective, step one, he had the right reaction to his brothers who threw him into a pit, which started this whole journey. Joseph was patient with God, and this allowed him to be patient with his brothers during the process. Joseph had a choice: depend on himself, fight his own battles, or depend on God and know that God would do a great work in time. One person said this, suffering is a misfortune when viewed from one side, but it is a discipline when viewed from the other side. God is actually disciplining us in those seemingly unfair times. It's like a crochet. I remember when I was in middle school, we had to make these projects where you'd crochet certain things. I forget what I made. I think it was a New Orleans Saint helmet, which surprises no one. And you look at the front and it's beautiful. Well, I don't know if mine was beautiful, it was acceptable, but you'd see it and it's really, really nice. And you'd see the gold helmet, the fleur-de-lis and everything that is on the Saints helmet, the stripe on the top. But you looked at the other side, there was knots and loose ends and everything was a mess. And really, that's a picture. What will you decide to see? Most people see the knots and the loose ends of their life rather than the beautiful product of what God is doing with their life. When life seems unfair, wait. Depend on God to do a great work over time at the right time. I've seen it in relationships. You can't rush a relationship, whether it's starting one, maintaining one, or repairing one. I've seen it in staffing. We're seeing it right now on our student pastor search. God has a perfect time. I see it in different trials of my life. Do you wait on God? Can you wait on God? Will you wait on God? That's the second reaction that we learn when life seems unfair. One more, and that's this. The third reaction when life seems unfair involves the matter of the will. Don't resent God's plan. Receive it fully. Often, at some point, we get so frustrated that we want to fight our way out of the unfairness. So many times, we just resent what God is doing. We can fight people, we can fight circumstances, and sometimes people even try to fight God. Joseph didn't do that, and neither should we. He surrendered his will to God's plan and received it fully. Notice Genesis 50, 15 to 17 and 21. When Joseph's brothers saw that their father was dead, they said this. This is later on. They said, what if Joseph holds a grudge against us and pays us back? They still didn't believe Joseph said, come near, I'm Joseph, I'll take care of you. They still didn't believe it. So they sent word to Joseph saying this, and they made this up. You can see, Joseph, your father left these instructions before he died. I ask you to forgive your brothers in treating you so badly. It's so manufactured and contrived. Jacob may have said that, but you could just see they were scared spitless. But Joseph wasn't resentful. He didn't resent God's plan. He received it fully all along, even his brothers' hatred of him. And look at his response. When their message came to him, Joseph wept. Circle that phrase. Joseph wept. Don't be afraid. I'll provide for you and your children. And he reassured them and spoke kindly to them. Here's an interesting fact. Do you know that where it says Joseph wept, the shortest verse in the Bible is John 11:35. You know what John 11:35 says? Jesus wept. Shortest verse in the Bible. Guess what? You probably know where I'm going with this. Here we go. Joseph is an Old Testament picture of the anticipation of the arrival of Jesus Christ in the New Testament. Did you know that while Jesus Christ was 100% God and 100% man, the Bible only one time says Jesus learned something. And of course, this is not in his deity. God doesn't need to learn anything. It's speaking of his humanity. Hebrews 5:8 says this, that Jesus learned obedience through the things that he suffered. Joseph did too. That's why he received God's plan fully. Joseph knew that bitterness never leads to betterness. If Jesus learned obedience in his humanity through the things that he suffered, we need to learn obedience through the things that we go through when life seems unfair. We need to do the exact same thing. We need to learn to accept and receive all God's doing in our lives in these seemingly unfair times. Do you receive God's plan? Can you align your will with God's will? And the story ends with this amazing statement from Joseph. This is kind of like the Romans 8:28 of the Old Testament. Romans 8:28 says, For we know that in all things God causes all things to work together for good for those who love him and are called according to his purpose. This is the Old Testament equivalent. Genesis 50:20. It says this, Joseph said, you intended to harm me, but God intended it for good to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives. Joseph's wisdom in interpreting the dream, the saving of lives through the accumulation of grain to save many lives during the 7 years of famine. If you think life seems unfair, get the right perspective on it. That's what you see. And change your reaction to it. That's what you do. What you see always determines what you do. I heard the story of a group of girls on a picnic in Washington State's Cascade Range. And when they went on a picnic and went for a walk, they took a wrong trail. They spent a terrifying night lost in this Cascades Range area. They wandered around. They were cold, they were wet, and they were hungry. It's a true story. One girl said, "They're never going to find us. We're going to die." In other words, she's basically giving up. 11-year-old Evanel Town said this. She stepped forward. She says, "Well, I'm not going to die." And then she said this. She says, "I've heard that if you follow a little stream, it empties into a bigger stream, and that the bigger stream will take us to where people live, maybe a town." And so she took the lead, and everybody followed. They found the little stream. They took that little stream. It led to a bigger stream, and within 5 hours, they found a town, and they were rescued. Isn't that something? And what was the difference? She got the right perspective on it. She changed her reaction to it. She didn't give up. She said, "I'm going to go with this," and it ended up leading to life. And here's what I want to say. In this story, Jesus Christ is the stream. Jesus even says, "I'm the water of life." And so what I want to say to you is this. What part of your life seems so unfair? I don't know what it is, but I'm telling you, it might seem unfair, but God is up to something. He wants you to get His perspective on it. He wants you to live out His best reactions to it, so He can take you to the little stream and the big stream and to the place of life. And Jesus Christ, who is a picture, Joseph is a picture of Jesus Christ. Not only did the saving of many lives happen in Joseph's time physically, Jesus saves many lives by providing the grain of life. He is the bread of life. He's not only the river of life, the little streams, He is the bread of life, if you will receive Him by faith. Does life seem unfair? Here's the solution. When life seems unfair, get God's perspective on it, and then change your reaction to it so you stop saying it's unfair. Let's bow our heads. Heavenly Father, thank you, Lord, for Joseph's story. Life was very unfair, seemingly, in his life, but you were orchestrating everything for good. Do the same for us, Lord. Help us know that if we love you and we've made you first in our life, you are orchestrating our life for good. Help us to get your perspective. Help us to pursue your responses and reactions so that we get to the place where we go from the pit to the pinnacle. And here's the most important thing, and this is really important. If you've never trusted your life to Jesus Christ, these promises are not guaranteed for you. God may do it, but He's not obliged to. But if you put your life in Jesus Christ, the bread of life, the river of life, the source of life, He will make everything work for good. Say, "Jesus Christ, I believe that you're God and that you're holy. And I sin and I'm unholy. I'm so sorry for that. Please forgive me because of your death on the cross. And please help me to be right with you because of your resurrection from the dead last Sunday on Easter. I trust you now. Come into my life. Make me brand new." And if you say it and mean it by believing and receiving Christ in your life, you have become a Christian. Now you have the tools to live this way. Please let us know about it. Father in heaven, help us all. Remember, then when life seems unfair, you are there. And we ask this through your Son, Jesus' name. Amen.
For those of you who just gave your life to Jesus Christ, I want you to know that as your church, we are celebrating with you, and there is no bigger decision that you have ever made. As your church, we want you to know that we are here for you. Now, the Connect button you clicked in the Lakeshore app earlier, I want you to go back there and click "I've made a faith commitment." We want to be there every step of the way. In this way, we can connect with you and help you on your path. We're so grateful for your partnership with us that lets us reach people around the world. If you give through recurring payments through your bank's bill pay, we want to say thank you for your consistency. And this helps us do what we do every day to reach out to every part of the world. You can also give through the Lakeshore app that we mentioned before or by going to lakeshorechurch.org/give. Once again, thanks for joining us today. We hope to see you back next week.